So I don't normally do video essay formatted stuff. This is a little bit different though. I had this idea for what I wanted to talk about. I was having a shower and I pretty much instinctively knew that there was no way I was going to be able to do it justice in my usual live stream format because chat would distract me and all that kind of stuff. And there was stuff I just wanted to get out. And the more I sort of pondered the idea, the more I played with it, the more I figured I'd do it as a video essay. So here we go. Now, this is in all the video essays where they talk about all their cool links for ways you can send them money. You don't have to send me money. I I'm not monetized on YouTube. This video absolutely would not be monetized if such a thing was a thing, but I'm a small streamer, Andy. The chances are either nobody will see this or thousands of people will see this and they'll all be angry fascists wanting to show up at my house and cause me a murder. So, whatever. You lives, you dies, you takes your chances. The title of this particular video essay is Fascism is a Warm Blanket. Obviously a nod to the Charles M. Schultz books I had as a kid. Like Happiness is a Warm Blanket. I don't think Mr. Schultz would be so happy about the comparison. And I'm not saying that fascism is happiness. This is not the case. Fascism is bad. Very, very bad. And I want to be all the way obvious and clear. This video is in no way going to promote fascism as anything but what it is. A selfish death cult of ignorance that deserves absolutely no respect and nothing but derision and disgust. But Jim, if it doesn't deserve attenting, then why are you attentating it? I feel like we've forgotten what we were supposed to never forget. You know, I'm an old ass man. I'm one of those rare Gen X people you hear about in movies. And we were raised to fight Nazis. When white supremacists tried to take up spaces in our culture, sometimes we physically fought them. We were the generation that first started calling our parents out for racial and gender slurs. And yeah, admittedly, most of us became boomers. We embraced the world of high finance and we forgot all about who we used to be. But once upon a time, we were fierce anti-fascists. We did forget. And more importantly, I don't think a lot of us ever really understood what fascism was. I think instead we fell into this false notion that fascism meant racism and concentration camps. But that's missing the forest for the trees. Racism, often it's a component of fascism, probably a pretty significant component, certainly in our previous historical instances. But you can be racist without being a fascist, tankies, now's balls, and you can be a fascist without being a racist. Focusing on racism as the defining trait of fascism gives fascists the ability to prove that they're not fascist because they have a black friend. As Umberto Eco put it, if we still think of the totalitarian governments that ruled Europe before the Second World War, we can easily say that it'd be difficult for them to reappear in the same form in different historical circumstances. Now, Eco really did see a tie between racism and fascism, but that's kind of the point of this video. I'm saying that Eco was right, but this new form of fascism doesn't need you to be a racist. It's a little bit on the nose for me right now because we have this convoy that's going from my home province of Alberta to the capital in Ottawa. That's right, I'm Canadian. And they're going to learn Justin Trudeau a thing or two about what he's doing with his vaccine mandates. So truckers recently, a rule was passed that you can't cross the border without being vaccinated. And truckers had been exempt from a lot of these things. Now they're not. There's a lot of people that are upset about that. I'm not going to get into the particulars of the convoy. Maybe I'll do that on a live stream. But there's a lot of allegations being hurled back and forth about fascism. And there's reason for this. The people who organized this and the people who are in some cases leading this are members of fascist groups. But it is particularly on people's minds right now. And I think that thing that I'm arguing with Eco about, that whole question of race and racism in fascism, is kind of particularly important. And it's also important because we keep mistakenly calling people racists when they're not, when they are maybe standing with racists. Now, don't get me wrong, don't fucking stand with racists. And if you realize that the people standing next to you are racist, you need to fucking move. But calling them racists when they maybe are completely oblivious of the fact that there's this racial undertone, this white supremacist undertone, only seeks to make people shut down the conversation and go, well, I'm not a racist, therefore this isn't racist. And that's annoying as shit to me. So what are we talking about when we say fascism? And to get a solid answer, let's just speed run through, and we're going to look at the 14 points that Umberto Eco defined in his essay Ur-Fascism. And we'll see how they compare with the things that we're talking about today. The cult of tradition. Tradition isn't a bad thing. Like, I happen to love traditions. Some people put far more importance on tradition than it maybe deserves. But the problem is that tradition's a good way for us to simply hide from our accountability for our actions and to avoid questioning things like our social norms. Just because something's been done before doesn't mean it's assumed to be a good thing to do again. If we rely solely on traditions to guide us, that means we can't do better than the past. And that's absolutely true. Eco puts it, truth has already been spelled out once and for all, and we can only keep interpreting its obscure message. That's why when conservative movements raise up tradition as somehow being sacred, that's always a real warning sign for me. Some examples of that, well, obviously those who believe to varying degrees in the absolute sacrosanct truth of their religious tradition. You know, the Bible for some people is an important book of writings. For others, it's absolutely true and should never be questioned. The earth is 6,000 years old. God will kill you for masturbating. In the US, there's those people, the Constitution is absolute and can never be questioned. Ironically enough, the same people typically like the Second and First Amendments, where we actively change the Constitution. But that's just semantics. On a less overtly political scale, we see things like the war on Christmas, which really is the war for Christmas exclusivity, in that people are fighting to ensure that no matter who you are, what holidays you may or may not participate in, you're required to talk about Christmas and only Christmas. Keep women out of politics because Eve bit an apple. The esprit de corps, Nostradamus. And please remember, I'm not saying that all traditions are fascist or that all people who enjoy traditions are fascists. I'm saying that if we elevate the importance of tradition and we embrace that idea that truth has already been spelled out and can't be questioned, that's bad. And it's one of the things that should start ding, ding, ding in that fascist alarm. The rejection of modernism. You hear a lot of specific key words around modernity and the rejection of modernism. Words like depravity and filth and degeneracy. These aren't words that are new. Hitler used to use these all the time in his talk. Degenerate art, all that sort of stuff. Essentially, there's this attitude that the Enlightenment was the origin point for all of the evil in the world. I guess all that talk of liberty and progress and tolerance is just code words for ruin fucking everything. And the important question to ask is, where's it all going to end? Right? You have these newfangled things like socialism and smartphones and smart foods, and that's why the gays are having transgendered abortions that the Catholic Church has to pay for. I think of this as another example of the beautiful people myth. That idea that once upon a time everything was just better, and then somehow we just went and fucked it all up and made everything crappy. The modern world is crappy, and we're just not going to take it anymore. Obviously, I'm being spurious, but kind of, sort of, not really. Like, if you listen to politicians that are appealing to that conservative and further right vote, this is exactly how they sound. The more you absorb the words of people in that alt-right pipeline, you hear, the more you see that the modern world, modernism, postmodernism, these are all active assaults on who we used to be. That's why we want to make America great again. That's why we want old stock Canadians, right? Progress is scary. And fascists are all about ramping up fears. So it makes sense that they spread that idea that progressive thinking is dangerous and needs to be routed out of modern society. Let's go back to those pre-Enlightenment days, like the Protestant Reformation or the Golden Age of piracy. I don't know. We'll have to figure that out. The cult of action for action's sake. This one's almost like a two-parter in that it refers to actions without thought, but also it's the demonization of thinking. You know what you have to do. You know how you have to act, or you know that the enemy will take over and destroy everything. So don't think about anything. Just snap to action. Action's its own reward. It's a bit contradictory that a lot of fascist groups spend a great deal of time constructing what they believe are reasonable arguments for things like ethnostates or genetic differences between races. But there's also this strong push that the idea of all this degeneracy we get comes from these ivory tower leftists living in their ivory towers and cunningly plotting to destroy the world. It's a benefit to the far right that thousands of people showed up for the Capitol Hill riots. What's more, the vast majority of those people were probably not actively plotting to stage an insurrection. Don't make a mistake, I think there were plenty of people who were actively planning that, but I'd speculate that the majority of the people that showed up were just angry. They saw a post on Facebook about marching to take back our country, and this appealed to people's frustrations, but I believe that a good number of those people that showed up never considered violence and chaos as a potential outcome. They just felt compelled to take action, to not sit back on the sidelines while an election gets stolen. That's what they want you to do. And we see this in a number of people who genuinely seem surprised that their actions would have consequences. Specifically, I'm thinking of that realtor, the one that was taking selfies and talking about being a proud patriot while she unlawfully entered the Capitol building. Now she's getting charged and going to jail. And I think, honestly, that her surprise is genuine. She didn't think she was participating in an armed insurrection. She was at a protest. Action for action's sake leads people like her into positions they wouldn't normally even consider. Disagreement is treason. So all of us filthy modernists and the science community and all of the lefties, we use disagreement as a method for engaging in critical thinking. Disagreements lead to people having to strengthen their arguments, confront their assumptions, and potentially accept that they're incorrect, things like that. Of course, I think, as a degenerate, that everyone should be doing this. That isn't me saying that as a commie pinko scum. That's me saying that as a person that values thinking about trying my best to understand my positions and make my opinions be based on the best possible information. If you aren't with us, you're against us. Isn't that a tale as old as time? It leaves no room for interpretation. I don't have to defend my opinions if I just decide that you either agree with me or you are my enemy. Of course, we know that there's always a certain amount of corporatist us versus them bullshit in any society, but the degree and the vitriol surrounding the discourse on both the right and the left has been ramping up to uncomfortable levels. Perhaps a lesser example, but one that I think is important because it shows the end result, is that great replacement, where the white folk will become minorities in essentially every single country they hold power in. This isn't something to actually be afraid of. And it's not an international plot. It's the realities of birth rates meeting the realities of wealth distribution. People in industrialized countries tend to make less of the babies, and people in poorer and more politically dangerous countries tend to want to move places where they may have more opportunities for a better life. But the fear of this replacement, that we're stealing the power, blah, 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 it's huge, and it hinges on the belief that white folk are going to be treated as badly as they've treated other groups. And in classic form, rather than addressing this by improving the way we treat other people, fascists promote the idea that instead what we need to do is create voter suppression laws so that we can continue to be the power brokers. Fear of difference. So this is a point where Eco and I do disagree. He says that Ur-Fascism is racist by definition. And I think that's wrong. I think the basic concept of what's different and therefore is seen to be scary and an enemy and all that stuff is valid, but it doesn't have to be about race. Race is an obvious choice for a focal point for what is different, but you can be afraid of differences that are political, religious, cultural, national origin, gender, sexuality, and so much more. I mean, it's not hard to imagine a zealous future world where homos and trans people could be the different that the society fears, and through that fear, persecutes. Yeah, race was what Hitler and his contemporaries typically focused on to use as a galvanizing force of the people, but I don't think it's essential that differences in race are necessary for fascism. Differences are. Appeal to the frustrated middle class. It is always true that the middle class are frustrated. The frustration, in Eco's words, refers to economic misfortunes or feelings of political humiliation. Trump is a fantastic example of this. He came to power as a big, strong authoritarian, promising to right the ship of America, which was in the midst of yet another economic downturn. He promised to bring back those middle-class jobs and stand up against corruption of the powerful and the media. He talked about gangs of illegals, as did Bush before him, slinking across the border to rape and murder the people. In more recent times, he appeals to the frustrations of his supporters who refuse to accept that he lost the election, culminating in the Capitol riots. Today's middle class is shrinking and working harder for less of a share of the pie. The "they're taking our jobs" mantra is huge right now, though it is misplaced. The jobs aren't being taken by lower social groups, they're being taken from us by higher social groups. The cause of economic suffering we're experiencing begins and ends at the top, with automation and expectations of people doing way too much. Trump's words made a lot of sense to a lot of people. He talked about draining the swamp and ending corruption and breathing life back into the working class. He did nothing to improve the lot of the workers. And that's inconsequential. People still believe that this billionaire is the guy who was on their side. Interestingly, this is also a key ingredient in the reverence of Bernie Sanders. The difference is, when asked how he would accomplish these things, Trump replies with jingles about draining swamps and coal jobs. Bernie provided a detailed plan for strengthening collective bargaining, supporting union workers, and revitalizing the economy. Only one of those is a solution to the problem. Obsession with a plot. It's the age of social media, and you can't avoid encountering plot after plot after plot. What Eco was talking about here was the idea that nationalism is born as an us against them mentality, with them being the nation's enemies, and that a plot by the nation's enemies is sinister and real and terrifying. The Jews in World War II were, as Eco points out, perfect for this, because there were Jews everywhere, even inside the country. However, if we look at things like the McCarthy era, we see that the enemy in the plot can take the form of communists or atheists or homosexuals, to the exact same effect. In the world of QAnon, the plot can be anything, because it's literally every paranoid fantasy stitched together with some twine, a Frankenspiracy, if you will. The big plot in fascist circles seems to end with globalists, which is just another name for Jews. Globalists want to teach CRT in grade school because it makes the youth hate their country. Globalists want to fling open the borders to let every single rapist, terrorist, murderer, gang member flood in, causing chaos and destroying the economy. Globalists funded research that led to COVID so that we could unleash a virus on the unsuspecting public and lock us in our homes, devastate our economy, and cede all our personal freedom to the state. The vaccine is the tool of globalists used to microchip us or weaken our systems or sterilize us, all to ensure that we remain locked in our homes, our economy remains devastated, and we have no personal freedoms. Too strong, too weak. Those of us on the left are amazing. We are simultaneously fragile snowflakes who can't handle any kind of conflict, and also the most powerful, dangerous criminal murders ever. We want to burn down your cities and destroy everything you've built. We're a bunch of losers. Stay home and eat your avocado toast, pussies. We snort adrenochrome straight from dead babies, and yet we're pussies. We're terrorists. We're the same people. Think a moment about the anti-vaccine movement. As a person who supports vaccination, I'm a big, stupid, dumb sheep. I'm scared of a virus. I'm terrified of a little flu. I need the Fauci ouchie to feel safe in the big, bad, scary old world. But simultaneously, I'm the regular German throwing stones at the poor Jews that they are in the time just before the Holocaust. I'm part of that terror mob that wants to starve them to death by preventing them from buying groceries. I'm the real fascist by trying to deprive them of their liberty. The context of the conversation dictates whether or not the left is super weak or super powerful. But it's a tactic. If we're powerful, it justifies stoking fears, and if we're weak, it gives resolve to overcome. Pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. Life is a never-ending struggle, a war without an end. Still, there has to be some sort of final solution to march towards, some time where the final battle takes place and we can all win and go home and live our lives in peace. I love the mantra taken from G. Michael Hoff's book, Those Who Remain. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. The only way to get to these fabled good times is by being strong. Pacifism will only draw the hard times out and make them worse. We have to be tough. We have to fight. Give no quarter. Be a strong man. Rawr! Oh, and obviously we're in this position because weak men came along and did this to us. Weakness is the enemy. Always fight. Rawr! Contempt for the weak. I mean, I feel silly even talking about this right now. I literally cannot imagine a more obvious thing when we're talking about the right wing in general. But to go for a particular example, the anti-vax fascist sees the vaccinated people as weak. The only people who are dying from COVID, according to them at least, are the overweight fatty fats that don't exercise and only eat bonbons, and they deserve to die. All anti-vaxxers are paragons of health and virtue, unlike the weak and pathetic sicky flabbies that got the vaccine. Remember, the enemies of fascists are always strong and always weak. Almost every meme and every thought-provoking video absolutely drips with contempt and derision for the foolish baby brains that actually believe something different than the point being expressed. It's easy to understand when your ideological opponents are constantly painted as being simpy cucky soy boys, too stupid to realize they're being manipulated, or too committed to imposing communist rule on free men. Everybody is educated to become a hero. All fascists are heroic fascists, at least to hear the fascists tell it. The reverence for these so-called heroes, like the many lone wolf shooters and incel mass murderers, is eerie because it's praising their actions as noble beyond their deaths, as if their death was just one step in their journey to greatness. When Dr. Wakefield had his medical license revoked, he was portrayed as a hero standing up to the medical establishment. Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson are always spraying this message to any listening ear, encouraging acts of violence under the get-out-of-jail-free card of, I didn't mean it. Remember, both of these people have successfully defended themselves based on the no reasonable person would believe this mantra. Fascism is a death cult, and the heroic fascist desperately wants to die a glorious death, striking a blow with their actions against their hated enemies. This is extremely dangerous because these glorious deaths almost always involve taking as many victims as they can. Machismo. You remember the fucking Access Hollywood tape? Yeah, the one where Trump was still on the campaign trail and was bragging about sexually assaulting women. Do you remember the reaction from Trump supporters? Oh, it was just locker room talk. It was normal. Grab her by the pussy was just boys being boys. And doggone it, he's a big-time celebrity. He probably can grab any woman and have his way with them, because he's just that macho. No Fap November, traditional roles for men and women, gun culture, toxic masculinity, rage ups, death threats, Punisher skulls, slut-shaming, and on and on and on and on. Selective populism. This is that thing where the leader of the fascist understands the will of the people, and they're uniquely capable of understanding and acting on behalf of that will. The fake news lamestream media no longer represents the will of the people, so it should be okay for us to jail them. Stacking the Supreme Court with rabid Christian conservatives to overturn Roe v. Wade is enacting the will of the people, even though the majority of Americans support abortion access. Stopping certain demographics from voting or disputing and refusing to accept the results of an election, you guessed it, that's the will of the people again. And this is true, provided that what we mean by the people is actually just that subset of people that share my personal beliefs and opinions. Newspeak. The MSM keep cucking the sheeple with their plandemic to push cultural Marxism. Where we go one, we go all. Globalists, 1776. George Orwell, 1530, 88, let's go Brandon. So that's the 14 points that Umberto Eco described in Ur-Fascism. A lot of them can be applied to a racial minority, but fascism doesn't require that. And modern fascism is smart enough to avoid it like the plague. The truly racist fascists hide behind racial science and talking points like that, because those concepts often can be met with less outright denial. And in the case of liberals, it's just free speech. I mean, there's some points there, right? Am I right? Fascism isn't racism, and not all racists are fascists. There's tankies. Pause for edgy gloating while audience gasps. So why do I say that fascism is like a warm blanket? Let me explain. A warm blanket is a symbol of comfort. You're snuggling up under a warm blanket on a cold night, keeping the elements at bay. It's just goddamn nice. And nice feelings are the things that make us happy and content. Even when it's not cold out, a warm blanket fresh out of the dryer is luxurious. The world outside isn't always cold, and it isn't always hot. It's just the world. Some of it is a bit scary, and some of it is genuinely gorgeous and wonderful. We know that people who are afraid tend to be swayed further towards the right, and people who are comfortable tend to be swayed towards the left. When we're scared, when it's cold, we want something comforting to keep the elements at bay and give us that sense of ease. Ever since fascism was invented by Julius Q. Fascisticus in his laboratory, fascists have been actively fomenting that sense of fear. In the early days of fascism, it was international Jewry that we were supposed to fear, and it worked across the world, from Hitler's Reich all the way to the American Nazi Party. But people are more likely to see through that particular rhetoric right now, and the education we get about anti-Semitism in World War II keeps the average person pretty apprehensive about the protocols of the Elders of Zion. But you don't need a racial group to spread fascist thought. You don't need a scapegoated race. You just need to sow the seeds of fear, distrust, and looming menace. So the modern fascists found new ways to spread that word. They basically found every imaginable outside the usual group, from incels to anti-vaxxers to organized atheism. They joined these groups and they began listening to them, making note of the things they feared, and focusing the conversation on those things. Vaccine skepticism, if I understand correctly, started long before Dr. Wakefield and his OMG Autism paper. And that paper in and of itself wasn't in any way fascist, just lousy science. But the more that paper got debunked, the more the people who were reading about vaccine hesitancy felt like they were being attacked and ignored. These are people who are reading constantly that vaccines like the one for measles, mumps, and rubella are active threats to their children. And as governments continue to promote vaccine use for these things, for schools and things, the bad actors in those groups spread that whisper that the government is really the big menacing enemy of the people. The more that notion takes hold, the more these communities feel like they're all alone. They're screaming into the wilderness about what they see as a legitimate danger. And they become more divided, angry, and alone. It doesn't start with reading the Elders of Zion or 14 words. They ease you in. They validate you. They promote and build on their imagined plot, feeding the idea that the group are the people who really get it, and the others are lesser. They stoke those fears, painting individuals as heroic, and all the while making sure that all roads lead further to the right. The same thing happens in practically every community that finds itself outside of societal norms. Racism doesn't have to come anywhere near it to promote fascism. In fact, that's way better for the fascists. If you have an Enrico Terrio, a person who's not white, as the figurehead of your fascist group, it deflects the idea that you might be fascist. How often do you hear people call the Proud Boys as fascists, and then the masses go, well, Enrique Terrio. Let's do a thing. Let's flash through these 14 properties and see which one applies to the Proud Boys. Okay, cult of tradition. All sorts of appeals to the value of tradition, how things were better before the woke people got all woke. As an example, their rhetoric about venerating the housewife is all about promoting traditional gender roles and the inherent value to the family unit of women staying home, cooking meals, and brapping out babies. Rejection of modernism. They sure do seem to hate postmodernists. They talk a great deal about it. Action for action's sake. These are people who will show up at any protest just to accelerate it to violence. Disagreement is treason? Yeah, they outright say that all the time and align themselves with right-wing groups that claim the mantle of patriotism. Fear of difference. Well, don't you know that the Marxists and other degenerates out there, they want to destroy the world, so you need to fight them. Appeal to the frustrated middle class. Well, a lot of Proud Boy talking points are direct appeals to this frustrated middle class, not to mention polo shirts and Ed Hardy cosplaying. Obsession with a plot. CRT is the way to force their kids to hate their country. BLM will burn the whole world down. Antifa are the real terrorists, funded by George Soros and Bill Gates. Are your enemies strong and weak simultaneously? They're constantly promoting the idea that the left are pussies, and simultaneously promoting the idea that the left are the biggest danger to the whole entire fucking world. Pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. That's not too subtle. You're either with us or against us. Contempt for the weak. Gavin McInnes talking about how back in the olden days when you had Nazis show up, they just get in a fight and beat people up, and beating people up was all that matters. And our enemies are weak, and we'll just beat them up with our big, strong, beaten-up arms because we don't masturbate like weak soy boy leftoids. Everybody's educated to become a hero. The Proud Boys are steeped in this. Everybody's ready to fight and maybe die for the cause, or at least be martyred and have their death mean something patriotic and beautiful. Well, that is until they lose a fight or face criminal prosecution. Machismo. The whole movement is a macho movement promoting chauvinism, tough guy tropes, and all the toxicest masculinity, like the trad wife. Selective populism, they're just here to protect the common man from degenerate leftists who want to destroy the whole fucking world. They're just here to act on the will of the unheard people and fight back against the leftist elites. Newspeak, I don't know that they create new language, but they embrace the shit out of it, and they absolutely love to speak in cultivated talking points with sneaky nods to hidden meanings like the OK sign, and adding things like co-opting Pepe as a form of newspeak. So which of these does the presence of Enrique Tarrio or any other non-whites get in the way of? The answer is none of them. Fascism often appeals to racists, but fascism doesn't have to be racist. Racism isn't the only problem here. For frustrated, ignored, isolated people, there's so many ways to get led down the road to fascism, and the point of this video is to point out that it's comforting to be a fascist. Don't get me wrong, it's infinitely more comfortable or comforting to just be a good person in a decent world, but when we're afraid, we want a big tough Trump man to protect us. We want a group to belong to that'll help us stand tall in the face of all this tyranny. We want like-minded people who get it and see the plot just like we do. Fascism does an amazing job of nurturing fear and shaping the argument such that the only people who can help you face that fear are your fellow fascists. It's a slow process. You don't go from the earth is flat to we should have a race war overnight, but at every step, the goal is to build on the existing frustrations, insecurities, and fears. It's all about adding to the sum of all fears and leading to the goal. In that sense, fascism is a warm blanket because it builds up the cold outside world and presents itself as the only source of warmth and comfort available. There's a schmaltzy old saying that fear is a virus. I totally agree with this sentiment, and fascists recognize that the spread of fear benefits them ideologically, and so they infiltrate, they spread the virus, and they offer the cure. But the cure isn't the cure, it just treats the symptoms, like giving painkillers to a cancer patient. Those painkillers become intensely important, but as much as they feel like a lifeline, they're not addressing the underlying problem. The tumor keeps on growing. But we've learned anything in the last 100 years, it's that painkillers are addictive and dangerous, and sometimes we need to wean ourselves off of them. So how do we do that? Well, it's honestly a bit of a powerless situation, just like dealing with a painkiller addiction. The person has to be open to the idea of quitting, or in our case, open to the idea that they may have flaws in their ideology. The person has to be able to see that they have a problem that needs attention. And we need to make sure that we're regularly and effectively disputing their claims. Most people aren't fascist, and even when they are led down that road, they're not committed fascists. They just get a little bit lost in effective manipulation that is used by fascists. That's why we have to have solid refutations of fascist commentary. That's why we have to effectively engage and stomp on fascists in things like debate circles. And that's why we have to be wary with how quickly we are to accuse people of being fascists. A lot of people who are parroting those statements aren't fascists. They're just brain rotted by manipulation. And calling them fascists further closes their mind to questioning what they're saying and sharing. Fascists always make the world seem bleak, and authoritarianism and ultimately violence are the only solutions. It's our job to counter this standpoint and show people that the world isn't all that bad, that there are good people doing good things, and that the fear they have isn't real. Change is scary, but change is also the way that things get better. Yeah, the world has problems, but it's also come so far as we've learned to do better. All the progress we've made is incredible, and it makes the world a better place. Going backwards doesn't mean the world's going to get better. It's the opposite. Actually, there was never a time when things were better for everyone than what we can go back to. All we can do is go forward. Progress.